When designing a tabletop role-playing game, the character creation rules can be constructed in a number of different ways. You have fairly concrete or rigid ones like Dungeons & Dragons, or ones that are more free-form like GURPS or Shinnecoin World Shapers. So let's unpack these different approaches and see the pros and cons and how you can apply those to a game you're working on. Hi, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and I'd like us to work together today to determine some better terms, some categories and axes that we can use to analyze character creation in some of our favorite games and in our own. So let's roll up our designer sleeves, and as always, we're not here to talk about how you should play games at home, but how to help us become better judges of games, analyze those systems, and learn from them when we create our own. I believe that there are two gradients, two spectrums we can use to analyze any given character creation structure in a role-playing game. The first of which is its rigidity, and the second of which is its randomization or control. So let's define these and see if we can apply them to some familiar examples. Dungeons & Dragons is a moderately rigid system, as an example. In that game, you choose a species, a class, and a backstory, but the bulk of your character, what they can do and what their abilities are, is based on your class. And those classes come very pre-packaged with sets of abilities. Now, you get to make choices within those classes, but they stay within their lane, so to speak. This is juxtaposed against a game with low rigidity, or maybe something we would say is more fluid or free form, like GURPS or Shinnecoin World Shapers. These games give you all the building blocks yourself. You can pick abilities over here, abilities over there, stats over here, stats over there, and you assemble a package not dissimilar to what a class would be in a game like Dungeons & Dragons, but you're given the freedom to mix and match as you see fit. Now, regardless of whether or not you're making the character in any of these three systems, regardless of that rigidity, you could end up with a similar character at the end of the day. You can make a D&D 5th edition rogue and a character in GURPS function very similarly and even look kind of similar at the end of the day, with similar abilities and skills filtered for both of those systems, regardless of how freeform or rigid each are. So now that we have this rigidity spectrum defined, let's talk about the pros and cons of either end of that spectrum. More rigid systems can be nice because they help us with balance and with the communication of concepts for the game. So let's unpack those really quick. Rigid systems help with balance because you're reducing the number of permutations the characters can have once they're done with character creation. By keeping them in these tracks and lanes and discrete packets, you don't have to test and worry about things combining in an unexpected way. And because there are fewer permutations to worry about, you can plan out what potential character builds would be. And even with things like multiclassing in Dungeons & Dragons, you can control what can and can't be multiclassed together with these rigid packets. The last point I want to make on balance is that it's easier with a more rigid system for a player to make a functional character and avoid traps within character creation. Because you're giving them these discrete packets of which you control the baseline, it means that a character is less likely to be dead in the water or useless when they finish character creation. You're not expecting them to have as much mechanical burden in this process as you would with something more fluid. Rigid structures are also helpful because they can communicate archetypical or game world concepts to the players in these really neat packages. What I mean by that is you can take a set of abilities like being able to turn undead and smite them and wear heavy armor and package that into something called a paladin. And that paladin could mean something in your world. And by seeing all these abilities packaged together, you're communicating to the player some amount of fiction, of narrative, and the intended structures that you would see in the world. Those classes like a rogue or a cleric, that tells you something just with a name alone, that helps communicate fiction to the players. So when they're talking to each other, they can say, I'm playing a rogue, and the other player knows what comes packaged with that information. They'll know about stealth and sneak attack and so on and so forth. And that's helpful for communicating as a designer how you intend the game to be played and what sort of archetypes are available. Now that rigidity comes at a price, and that price is often creativity. And what I mean by that is not that you can't create whatever character you can imagine, but how those are reflected mechanically has to be put through the sieve that is the class structure, that rigid structure. You need look no further than the DM's Guild for the myriad of new subclasses and classes and species and all of these new structures that people have created because the existing class system is a little too rigid to explore all the concepts that people can imagine, even if they fit within the reality bar or established fiction of Greyhawk or the Forgotten Realms. The benefits of a more fluid system are basically the opposites of the drawbacks of a rigid system. It allows you to express that creativity more easily. It lets you build your own character class based on the fiction you want, especially for games that have a robust amount of options built in, like GURPS, Savage Worlds, Shenanigans World Shapers. All of these give you dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands, of disparate building blocks that you can use to assemble your own class structure based on whatever fiction you're going for. And for those universalist systems like I've been mentioning, it means you can build a gunslinging cowboy, a sneaky rogue, a raging barbarian, a spellcasting wizard. You can build whatever you want with whatever nuance you want, like a wizard that's also sneaky and can stab people, or a raging warrior that also can use holy magic. This would all be possible, system dependent of course, because that fluidity doesn't keep you locked into any one path. Now, the cons of a more fluid system are the opposite of the pros of the more rigid system. A fluid system is much harder to balance. You're giving players way more permutation freedom than you would otherwise, which means there are so many different routes and paths that the players can take when building their characters. It means that your floor, as in how powerful a character is minimum, and the ceiling are way farther apart, because a character could very much more easily be dead in the water after character creation due to this freedom, or there could be utterly overpowered because you weren't able to test all 5 million combinations of character creation before release. And these more fluid systems make it harder to communicate packets of narrative through character builds than the more rigid ones, simply because you don't have these assemblages of abilities that create a paladin or a rogue or a barbarian or a wizard. Instead, you have all these building blocks, which individually may communicate a small amount of information, but it's not going to have quite as much narrative oomph as something that is higher up on that rigidity scale. And just to triple underline it, the rigidity and fluidity of a system is not a value judgment about how good or bad that character creation system is. These are simply just different approaches that have different benefits and drawbacks, and you should be very cognizant of where your game falls on this spectrum. So that second gradient I mentioned at the start of the video is how random or how much control the player has during character creation. So let's unpack this really quick. It shouldn't take too long, as I think this one's kind of self-explanatory. Put simply, games have a different level of randomization built into character creation. One of the famous examples is a character in Traveler can die during character creation simply due to the randomization involved. With the examples we've been going over so far, like Dungeons & Dragons, Cypher, GURPS, all of these are extremely low randomization, if not no randomization involved. In a game like Dungeons & Dragons, you're allowed to roll your attributes, but no other part of that process is a random one. In Cypher and in GURPS, there's really nothing random going on here. You are building things yourself with complete control. Games that favor lower control, or we might say higher randomization, would be ones that are in the OSR community, as an example. With these, you can often randomly determine much of your character build at the start as an element of fun and gambling, because these characters often die and you need to make new ones. So by relegating some of that process to a die roll or two, it expedites the process of character creation. So high control and low control, they have some drawbacks and some benefits to it. The more control you give the players, the more time it will take for them to make a character because you're giving them more decisions, but then the character becomes more of their own creation and more an example of their expression. Now, when you have low control, it expedites that process of character creation and adds sort of a fun randomization element to it where you can gamble up a character and amuse yourself with what combination was resulting. That high level of randomization and expediency of character creation, though, can create a detachment to the character itself, and may not lend itself as well to a long-form type of play. If you're churning through characters and building them randomly, they're less of an emotional connection you may forge with them because of their expendable nature. Now, of course, you can have hybrid situations where a character creation system allows you to build a character in a bespoke manner with high control, or everything is lined up to a random table and you can choose to randomly determine all of the elements if you want. And those kind of approaches can be convenient to cater to both groups of people, those that want something really fast, those that want to customize it completely. Similarly, you could have a game that's default character creation is a rigid structure with these classes and species all very laid out specifically, but then provide optional rules that let them build them from disparate pieces. Or the reverse, where the game gives you just all the building blocks itself, and then lists on the side there some archetypes to get you started should you not want to have to choose it all yourself. So where does Tales from Elsewhere fall on these various spectrums and gradients? Well, Tales from Elsewhere is a pretty low rigidity, high control character creation process. So let's unpack it and I'll show you what we've been working on, because as of the release of this video, the character creation playtest packet is now available. So there'll be a link down below to go find out where that is. You can also join the Discord to download the various packets. So I hope you check it out and follow along with me as we go through this system. In Tales from Elsewhere, a character is made up of their skills, their knowledge, their possessions, and their edges. These are the fundamental building blocks of any individual character, and all of them will have the same number of these things, but spread across different areas. For example, the character could be master rank in the melee skill, or a novice in acuity. They could have the bloodlust edge, or the cat burglar edge. They could have knowledge of wondrous technology, or unholy, or eldritch. All of these things come together to create what that character is and does within the system. Now, rather than let the players simply assemble a fresh character from all the different options available within the rulebook, of which there are a lot, they're instead grouped and categorized into small packets that the player picks to create a full character story and a full character build. The way they do this is with their backstory elements. You have 3 backstory elements in Tales from Elsewhere. You have your profession, your culture, and your incident. Now, each of these give you access to certain categories of edges and certain skills you can pick to be good at, as well as categories of knowledge. Now, each of them is going to give you a different list, and after you've chosen all 3, you assemble from those categories your total build. Now, the reason for this approach is to gain as many of the benefits of a low rigidity system, the freedom to customize a character, while still trying to get some of the narrative oomph, the narrative packeting that archetypes on a more rigid system can provide. For example, if a character wants to be good at shooting guns in Tales from Elsewhere, well, they'll need to pick backstory elements that might provide them with access to the Deadeye category of edges and give them the ranged skill among their backstory skills. If all 3 of their choices from profession, culture, and incident are missing those categories and that skill, well, then they can't be good at shooting a gun. But there are almost 50 backstory elements, so there's a lot of ways to get access to shooting a gun. And that's what can create an interesting process for the player character to not only try to optimize themselves mechanically, but also connect themselves to the world in a more substantive manner. For example, if a character is a gambler from the big city, so their profession is gambler, their culture is big city, and they want to be able to shoot a gun well, they'll need to pick an inciting incident that would give them that skill, like maybe they're on the hunt. Now this tells a little story. They're a gambler from the big city who's on the hunt. What are they on the hunt for? Who are they trying to track down? Who they're going to try to kill? And that is now more interesting than simply saying I tack on the ranged skill to my backstory skill access. Similarly, if a player wants to have access to supernatural edges, they can't just pick that they are a lawman who's from the salt of the earth and who lost it all. That wouldn't give them access to anything supernatural in their backstory. So instead, maybe they would be a lawman who is salt of the earth, who had a brush with madness. Now they can select a supernatural edge at character creation, and now they're prompted to come up with something more interesting for their character's backstory. What did they see in these dark visions? What happened when they had this brush with madness? It's connecting them more to the story and the narrative. Now let's go through an example of character creation in Tales from Elsewhere. We're going to create a character made by one of the Tales from Elsewhere patrons, Red Richard. Now, if you're interested in supporting this project, the channel, and the game, go ahead and check out our Patreon page. There'll be a link down below. Patrons get special rights in the Discord server, and I get to do things like this, where I show off their original creations on the YouTube channel. So thanks, Red Richard. Let's take a look at Cullen Gray. Let's take a look at Cullen's backstory before we get into his character build. My name's Cullen Gray. A couple years back I joined a group of homesteaders on their way to a secluded corner of the Rune Nation to carve out a life for ourselves. I was the 13th and final member to join. They brought me along because I was learned on how to keep the cattle from getting sick, and the dock they had lined up chickened out. For a while everything seemed to be turning out, the land produced, and the first winter passed with but only a single casualty. And with the second harvest approaching, we was all in good spirits. That was until the plague hit. It started as a little cough, but before the sun reached its zenith on the second day, it had taken its first. Everyone was coughing up their guts, and many of us were bleeding from the eyes so bad you couldn't see 4 paces. To make matters worse, I felt something following me everywhere, just out of sight, as I did my best to make people's final moments a little easier. Never could get a good look, thought I was going mad. That's when the dead started getting up and attacking everyone else. So I grabbed a shovel and put them down, all of them. Then I lay on my cot, covered in blood, and waited for my turn. But it never came. I recovered. The cough never went away fully. I guess I still got a job to do. And while I'm not much good at fixing what ails you, I might be able to break the foes before you get hurt in the first place. I reckon if the Ruination don't get me today, then the cough will on the morrow, and I'll be damned before I'm the last one alive again. So for Cullen Gray's build, Red Richard chose the profession Doctor, the culture Salt of the Earth, and the incident hit rock bottom. Let's take a look at what each of those decisions gave him. Choosing Doctor as the profession gave Cullen access to the Dexterity and Discipline skills, the Crafting and Survival Edge categories, the Dedicated, Mannered, and Unfazed traits, and Chemistry, Medicine, and Sciences for knowledge, as well as a handful of useful medical gear. For Culture, Cullen Gray has Salt of the Earth, which gives access to Might and Reflexes skills, the Defensive and Survival categories for edges, the traits Old-Fashioned or Pragmatic, and Agriculture, Geography, and Woodcraft for the knowledge, as well as a horse and a lasso or whip. Cullen Gray's Inciting Incident is hit rock bottom, and from that, he gets to pick from Brawling and Dexterity, the Bruiser Edge category, the Addicted and Desperate traits, and Knowledge of Gambling, as well as some consumables, some medicines that he can carry with him on his journeys. From those backstory skills, Red chose Adept Brawling, Master Discipline, and Adept Reflexes to be his best skills. So this means that Cullen Gray here has an iron will and an iron gut, and is good in a fist fight or wielding his shovel, but also can be pretty sneaky and dodge incoming attacks. The edge Cullen Gray chose from the Doctor options was Cheat the Devil, which lets him spend 1 luck to negate an incoming injury, as well as when he starts his turn dying, he has a 10% chance to actually pop right back up as if all of his injuries were treated. From his second choice, Salt of the Earth, he chose Moonshiner, a crafting edge. This lets him make drinks and tobacco and all sorts of fun stuff whenever he gets downtime. From his hit rock bottom, he chose the Zealous Fervor edge, which whenever he's emboldened, which you can trigger by drinking a swig of alcohol, his melee strikes become stronger, and so do those of his friends. The resulting character is a nice mix of defensive features and offensive features, with very good vigor and grit, but no slouch in a fight with a shovel or without any weapon at all, and a grab bag full of useful medicines and utility consumables to get him through the day. Well, I hope you like taking a look at Cullen Gray. I think it's a really fun character and be very effective, a nice balance of offense and defense. And if you want to try your hand at making some of these cool Weird West characters in the Clockworld setting of Tales from Elsewhere, check out the links below or join the Tales from Elsewhere Discord, and consider becoming a patron and helping us fund the artwork that goes into these games. Hope you enjoyed all of that, and we'll catch you next time on Tales from Elsewhere.